Hello, everybody. For those of you I don't know, I'm Bob Levy, Chairman Emeritus at the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank in Washington, D.C. When I say libertarian, I'm not referring to the political party, but to libertarianism as a political philosophy devoted to private property, free markets, individual liberty, and limited government. At Cato, we don't endorse candidates or parties. We're critical of both Democrats and Republicans, but we do have a consistent minimalist view of the proper role of government. Conservatives agree with us on some issues, like lower taxes, less spending, fewer regulations. Liberals agree with us on other issues, like marriage equality, drug legalization, and civil liberties. So does that mean libertarians are philosophically inconsistent? And no, in fact, it's conservatives and liberals who are inconsistent. Conservatives want less government control of the economy, but more government on social issues, and liberals are just the opposite. More government control of the economy, less government in the social area. Libertarians want small government across the board, a government that stays out of our wallets, out of our bedrooms, and out of foreign entanglements, unless our vital interests are at stake. Today, to partially flesh out the libertarian perspective, I'm going to talk about the apparent conflict between anti-discrimination laws and the right to discriminate. I'll be discussing several key constitutional provisions: freedom of association, free speech, religious exercise, and civil rights. All of those topics arise as part of a 2023 Supreme Court case called 303 Creative LLC versus Elenis, which tested whether a private business owner could be compelled to design a website for a gay wedding. So here's the background. Lori Smith is a devout Christian who believes that marriage must involve one man and one woman. She wanted to expand her business to include wedding websites, but not for same-sex weddings. She was blocked from doing so by Colorado's Anti-Discrimination Act, which prohibits public accommodations, that is, most businesses that are open to the public, from discriminating on the basis of certain protected characteristics, including sexual orientation. In other words, the business could not deny service to gay couples. In 2016, Smith asked a federal court to stop Colorado from enforcing the act because it would violate her First Amendment rights to free speech and free exercise of religion. Smith lost in both the trial court and the 10th Circuit Appellate Court, but the Supreme Court agreed to take up the free speech issue and ruled in her favor. For reasons I'll discuss shortly, the court decided not to take up her free exercise of religion claim. I'm going to start with another question that the court did not consider, and that is whether Colorado's public accommodation law is itself unconstitutional. I subscribe to the somewhat radical notion that private businesses should be able to serve or not to serve same-sex couples, or, for that matter, opposite-sex couples for any reason whatsoever. At the outset, I should mention that I and others at the Cato Institute have vigorously supported marriage equality. I served as co-chair of the American Foundation for Equal Rights, which sponsored the Prop 8 litigation in California and laid the groundwork for the Supreme Court's landmark Obergefell v. Hodges decision that recognized a constitutional right to same-sex marriage. So I take a backseat to no one on the issue of gay rights. And still, let me begin with this proposition based on freedom of association. Private businesses should have a constitutional right not to serve same-sex couples. If you think the Constitution requires non-discrimination, you misunderstand the nature of that document. The Constitution is not a code of conduct that private citizens must obey. Its dual purpose is to limit the power of government and prevent government from violating our rights. It's not the people or the citizens who are required to obey the Constitution, it's the government. And that's why libertarians believe in both the right to gay marriage and the right, not the morality, but the legal right to discriminate against gays. Government may not discriminate in granting marriage licenses, but private parties conducting business on their own private property should have a right to associate with whomever they please. Accordingly, individuals and business owners should be able to serve gays only, straights only, both of them, or neither of them, for good reasons, bad reasons, or no reasons at all. The right to associate is paramount. It's much broader than exempting business owners based solely on their religious freedom or speech claims. Private businesses should be able to select their customers guided by the marketplace, constrained by competition. Generally, that process leads to fair outcomes. Yes, I recognize that for many years, prior to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, free markets sometimes produced, especially in the South, segregated restaurants and hotels. But that's not the whole story. Private businesses that discriminated were aided and abetted by government collusion and Jim Crow laws. The offending states used three strategies. First, they controlled the police and the courts. Second, they denied services such as water and electricity to firms that wouldn't toe the segregationist line. And third, they ignored or even supported private violence. So, yes, state and federal anti-bias laws were justified to counteract government complicity in private racial discrimination. Did those laws cure the problem? No, they did not, which proves that government intervention in private markets doesn't always work. The proper comparison is not markets versus an ideal world where social justice is ubiquitous. Instead, the relevant comparison is markets versus government regulation. No reasonable person disputes that government occasionally does good things, but the equation isn't complete without considering the bad things that inevitably accompany the good. So, along with restaurant and hotel integration, which I think it's fair to say would have happened without government, although probably more slowly. But along with those, we now have the inequities associated with such government programs as minority set-asides and racial preferences. Remember, there is a distinction between law and morality. It's perfectly consistent to argue, first, from a legal perspective, that discrimination should be permitted in any society that honors freedom of association. A member of one religious or racial or ethnic group should not be required to associate with members of other groups. On the other hand, from an ethical perspective, religious, racial, and ethnic discrimination can be reprehensible. I condemn people who practice such discrimination, even as I insist on their legal right to do so. The main point is this: if government actions foster discrimination, the Constitution bars those actions. But private discrimination that isn't facilitated by government can be condemned via non-governmental means. For example, refusal to patronize bigots, social ostracism, adverse publicity, boycotts. It may be morally wrong to discriminate, but in a totally free society, private parties should have a legal right to do so. We can condemn immoral conduct such as lying, infidelity, and even bigotry without empowering government to take remedial actions. Don't forget that markets and competition offer built-in incentives against discrimination. Generally, businesses want more customers and the most capable employees. Consider the NBA. It's dominated by African American players, not because NBA owners were especially enamored of integration, but because those players are talented and they attract large and profitable audiences. Competitive markets reward tolerance and penalize bigots. And that's true whether we're talking about basketball or website designers. In short, we should permit private, but not government, discrimination, even if the rationale is that a service provider simply doesn't want to associate with the persons seeking service. The right not to associate is the flip side of our constitutional right of association, which is guaranteed by the First Amendment. That's my admittedly hardcore view regarding freedom of association, but it wasn't the basis on which the Supreme Court resolved the web design case. And that's because my view of what the law ought to be is not what the law is. In fact, the owner of 303 Creative, Lori Smith, didn't even assert freedom of association. She made two different constitutional arguments, based first on free speech and second on her religious objection to gay marriage. To win, she had to succeed on only one of those arguments, either one. The Supreme Court, however, believed that her religion claim was the weaker of the two. And therefore, I'm going to spend just a minute or two on the religion issue and then move on to Smith's stronger argument against compelled speech. That's what the court addressed in its opinion. Here's the problem with Lori Smith's free exercise of religion claim. More than 30 years ago, Oregon denied two Native Americans unemployment benefits after they were fired for using the drug peyote. They sued, claiming they used peyote in a religious ceremony and were thus protected by the First Amendment. But the Supreme Court, in a 1990 case, held that government could restrict the exercise of religion so long as the regulation was applicable to everybody and didn't specifically target religious practices. So Oregon could ban peyote in a religious ceremony as long as the state banned peyote everywhere else. In the website case, Colorado's public accommodation law did not target 303 Creative or religion. It applied to nearly all businesses serving the public, regardless of their owners' religious views. Accordingly, Ms. Smith would likely have had an uphill battle on her religion claim. But fortunately for her, the First Amendment also protects speech. It guarantees that individuals can't be compelled to say things they find offensive. Here's how the court put it in West Virginia versus Barnett, a 1943 case holding that public school students didn't have to pledge allegiance to the flag. Quote, if there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official can prescribe what shall be orthodox in matters of opinion or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. That principle doesn't change just because a business or an activity serves the public. For example, the Supreme Court ruled that the Boy Scouts couldn't be compelled to have a gay troop leader. Chief Justice Rehnquist said it would violate the Scouts' First Amendment right of expressive association. It would force the organization to send a message, both to the young members and to the world, that the Boy Scouts accept homosexual conduct as a legitimate form of behavior. Along the same lines, the public accommodations law in Massachusetts couldn't force organizers of a private St. Patrick's Day parade to include LGBT participants. In the court's words, there's a fundamental First Amendment rule that a speaker has the autonomy to decide what not to say. The key here is the message, not the gay couple. Try this thought experiment. Two gay guys walk into 303 Creative LLC. They tell Lori Smith they'd like her to design a website to celebrate a friend's birthday. Can she refuse because the couple is gay? No, she can't. Then a different gay couple comes in and tells Miss Smith they're getting married and they want her to design a website for their wedding. Should Smith be permitted to decline because she conscientiously opposed same-sex marriage? In my view, yes. 303 Creative did not refuse to serve gay couples. Lori Smith would design them a website for just about any occasion, but not for their wedding. Nor would she design a same-sex wedding website bought by heterosexual friends as a gift to the gay couple. And she wouldn't design websites containing other messages that offended her deeply held beliefs, such as websites that endorse abortion or promote gambling. To Lori Smith, it was the message that mattered, not the identity of the customer. Smith emphasized that she doesn't do off-the-shelf websites. Her creations would be customized around the story of each couple, thus requiring considerable time and effort for each project. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals agreed that her creations are, quote, pure speech. But, said the court, Colorado's anti-discrimination law is still justified to ensure that LGBTQ customers have access to the unique services that Smith provides. That assertion is simply bizarre. Through 2022, there were more than 700,000 same-sex weddings in the United States. Can anyone name a single gay couple unable to arrange for a customized website? The state has no compelling interest in compromising vital speech rights to ensure access to services that are already available to anyone who wants them. The pivotal point is this. Colorado sought to force Ms. Smith to use her talents to design a website she had not yet conceived, with the knowledge that her work would be on display in celebration of a marital union that her religion forbids. Website design is expressive speech. That's not even a close call. Maybe down the road, courts will have to draw lines determining which other acts qualify as expressive speech and which do not. But that's what courts do all the time. In a series of previous line drawing cases, courts decided that expressive speech can include music, flag burning, nude dancing, video games, tattooing, custom painted clothes, stained glass windows, pictures, films, paintings, drawings, engravings, even some such sexually explicit materials. Suppose a gay couple insists on a website with the words, God loves gay marriage. Should Lori Smith, who believes the exact opposite, be forced to design that website? Incredibly, Colorado's public accommodations law says yes. I think most persons would say no. Viewpoints cannot be mandated by the state. That example, to me, is crystal clear. But which other words or symbols are sufficiently expressive to be protected under the First Amendment? Reasonable people can disagree. Obviously, we can't have legislatures or courts making those decisions website by website. And that's why the Supreme Court had to establish some limiting principles. Otherwise, some states might require black tailors to fashion robes for KKK events, or Jewish-owned shops to sell T-shirts with swastika emblems. I'm not making that up. The Colorado statute had no exceptions for offensive symbols or even offensive words. If state laws were to force artists like Lori Smith to help celebrate what their faith bars, that would not foster civility, pluralism, or tolerance. Instead, the Supreme Court opted for a reasonable balance. that bars businesses from discriminating against people solely because of who they are, while permitting owners to reject ideas such as same-sex marriage that violate their conscience. That's what freedom of expression is all about. Justice Gorsuch wrote the opinion for a 6-3 court divided along ideological lines. He held that the First Amendment prohibits Colorado from forcing a website developer to create expressive designs containing messages with which she disagrees. So, Lori Smith can speak her mind, regardless whether the government considers her speech sensible and well-intentioned or deeply misguided. Websites are clearly a form of expressive speech, and the Colorado Public Accommodations Law is not immune from the demands of the U.S. Constitution. Justice Sotomayor, with Kagan and Jackson, dissented. They claimed that the state law target conduct, not speech, and discrimination has never constituted protected expression. Sotomayor wrote, quote, "Our Constitution contains no right to refuse service to a disfavored group." That statement, I believe, misreads the case because, as I noted, Lori Smith did not refuse service to gays. She simply refused to promote gay marriage. Where does that leave us? Probably with more litigation. Unfortunately, the court did not tell us how to distinguish speech from mere conduct. I would have opted for a brighter line rule. First, is the item a standard off-the-shelf product or a customized made-to-order article that requires unique input by the seller? If the item is standardized, it must be provided to all customers without discrimination. But otherwise, second, does creation of the item convey a specific message that offends the seller's sincerely held beliefs? If so, then third, is the seller able to communicate her objection to the message to persons likely to interact with the item? In brief, sellers should not be forced to express disagreeable messages that they cannot rebut. Would that cover all the borderline cases? No, but it would cover Lori Smith, who would shape an expressive portrait of each marital couple. My proposed 3-part test would provide a practical, bright-line rule that would comfortably characterize the vast majority of transactions as falling on one side of the line or the other. Then we could tolerate a few gray areas at the margin that courts could resolve. Instead, the states persist in passing laws that are overreaching, unconstitutionally vague, and serve only to plunge the nation further into the culture wars. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, the couple demanding a website from Lori Smith could easily have obtained a comparable website from another vendor. Instead, they decided to litigate. That was their legal right. They plainly suffered what's called dignitary harm. They were refused service, the same service extended to virtually all other customers, merely because, as Justice Kennedy wrote in the Obergefell case, they aspired to the transcendent purposes of marriage. Yes, Smith had a sincere religious objection to same-sex marriage, but there can be little doubt that her act was highly offensive to her would-be gay clients, and, frankly, to me, and perhaps to many of you. How can we resolve that dilemma? Justice Kennedy, in the Obergefell case, even as he established a constitutional right to gay marriage, counseled tolerance of opposing views. He wrote, and I quote, "Many who deem same-sex marriage to be wrong reach that conclusion based on decent and honorable religious or philosophical premises, and neither they nor their beliefs are disparaged by the court. Many years earlier, the Supreme Court considered a different form of dignitary harm when the Reverend Jerry Falwell was caricatured by Hustler magazine as an incestuous drunkard. Said the court, in a unanimous opinion, some dignitary harms must be tolerated in order to promote, quote, adequate breathing space to the freedoms protected by the First Amendment. That's it for today's discussion. I hope it's been informative and thought-provoking. Many thanks for your time and attention.